Now let's jump into illustrating this fun kiwi. This time we're going to start with a very simple sketch. Start by drawing a loose circle. It does not have to be perfect because fruits are organic and imperfect, but if you want a perfect one, you can trace over something round, like tape or a cup. Next, draw in the shape for the center. I'm doing a heart, but you can do an oval or a star or any other simple and large shape, and that's it. We're ready to ink. Ink with whatever you like. Just be sure it's waterproof. I go for the zebra brush pen to mix it up. Notice how I don't let all my lines touch and I don't make them perfect but instead add a slight wobble to them. I also connect the lines with dots to add some interest and texture. This is something I like to do, but you don't have to do it. Next, ink in the shape by drawing in small clusters of lines that always face the center of the kiwi. I leave white space in between them because if I go all the way around like an outline, it won't look as organic and it will be flat. I'm just trying to capture the texture of the kiwi. Next, ink in small black ovals all around the shape, also facing in the same direction as the lines. When doing this, be careful not to overdo them, and notice how I turn my paper while doing this to make sure my hand is comfortable. You should do the same because it will make it easier for you to draw them in the right direction and just to draw. I also add in some small dots at random parts at the end of the black dots. I vary where they are and notice how they match the dots I used previously on the outline. It's good to use a similar technique throughout the piece. Next, draw in the second outline within using the same style as we did on the outside. This is just to make the rind of the kiwi so we can add a second color in to make it more interesting. Notice how imperfect it is again for an organic feel. Now we're done inking, so simply erase your pencil marks and get your watercolors out. I start with very little green paint and lots of water, and notice how the ink from the big dots bled. I thought that I waited more than a minute so it should be fully dry, but it's not because there is more ink in the area and I should have waited a little more. But that's okay. This is a good example of what to do when you mess up. Throw it away, right? No, guys, you just have to roll with it. I mess up all the time, and there's so many ways to fix mistakes in watercolor, so don't worry about it. I let all the grayish paint only be around the heart, and then I add more of a lime green, which can be easily mixed with the green and yellow and painted around the piece. Now, it doesn't only look intentional, but pretty cool. I really like the little grayness added in there. So see, don't panic. Next, while it's still wet, I pick up some dark green and drop it in around the outside of the kiwi. Notice how it's not a lot of paint still, but mostly water because I want the color change to be gradual and we're going to layer here. Then I take a small brush and add in the same color around the kiwi center. Since it's still wet there, the paint blends in, but I'm not painting perfectly around. It's just lines going on the same direction as we drew the black dots before, and they have space in between them. I do this to capture the texture of the kiwi. Next, I pick up some yellow ochre, or you can mix yellow and brown, and paint around the edge of the kiwi. And this time it's a lot of paint and little water so that it spreads less and stays put. You can wait for the first layer to dry fully if you don't want to spread at all, but I like the loose look of paint mingling and I wanted it to go from one place to the next. I want the colors to be a little more intense, so I pick up slight variation of green, this time an olivey green, and paint around the edge within the skin and then do the lines around the center again. Only this time some parts of the first layer are wet so it spreads and in others it's not, so it keeps the hard edges. Since I want a soft look all around, I fix this by going in with a clean and slightly wet brush and I smooth out the edges just by painting there with water. This makes the paint fade out and gives a soft look that I want. So you can always manipulate your paint to do what you like. Next, I pick up some yellow and paint in around the center with very small lines going in. This also adds more texture and blends in with the previous paint and makes a nice, interesting gradient around the heart. We're done for now, so I add a slight splatter by gently tapping my finger on a larger brush loaded with paint and water. I use the same colors we already used and don't overdo it. Now let's make a fun splash background. All you need is a drinking straw, but don't panic if you don't have one. You can always just blow directly with your mouth. It'll just be a little bit harder, but it's totally doable and I've done it on plenty of occasions where I didn't have straws. Let's start by picking up a darker color with a bigger round brush, and be sure you have lots of water on your brush. I chose a nice shade of green and painted around the kiwi in 3 different places like this. And then I pick up a lighter color, I chose yellow, and I fill in the rest of the outline. Now their paints are going to gradually blend into each other, that's why I chose a darker and lighter color. So move quickly. This has to happen while it's wet. Get your straw and position it pointing away from the kiwi center and blow. Keep doing this all around the piece by rotating the paper as you blow each section. If it becomes too difficult to blow an area, just drop in more paint and water and try again, like I did here. I continued doing this until the whole background is balanced. Isn't this awesome? And then I add in some more splatter. But this time I go a little more crazy with it because I really like splatter. If you don't want any more splatter on your kiwi, you can cover it with paper towel before you splatter so it doesn't get inside of it and it's just a background, but I like it messy. Now you can be done here, but I think the piece benefits from one more layer. I take the same dark green that was used in the background and loosely paint within. But this time the paper is dry, so all my strokes will dry as they are. That's why it's important to keep it organic and random, so it looks like it belongs with the looseness of the piece. I add another layer on the inside, and the edges will stay sharp as well because the paper is dry. So once I'm done painting them in, I use a clean wet brush to fade out the edges of the lines just by painting next to them with plain water, because I don't want that sharp feeling all around. But it stays in the middle, and that makes a nice contrast. And we're done with the painting and the inking. I dried the piece with a hairdryer, and if you have a white gel pen or some other white media, you can now draw in small lines around the heart, similar to what we did before to add more texture and depth. I add in long lines and short lines closer to the center, and I also add a second line from some of the long lines for a V-type shape. But the way you do this step is up to you. It is important to go in the same direction as the other line so that it blends in and matches. I also outline the outside and inside of the rind, but not all the way around, and I add in the little circles I'm so fond of by drawing little clusters with various sizes throughout the piece. These benefit the most by being in the darkest parts of the composition. For one last touch, I use Prismacolor pencils to add in some more texture and depth by drawing in more lines around the center with a nice green and by drawing inside the rind with a brown. I love using colored pencils for adding texture like this. It makes such a nice contrast with the smoothness of the watercolors, and the piece is done. I hope you had fun with this one and picked up a lot of new techniques. I can't wait to see your take on it. Now let's illustrate some gorgeous wildflowers in a glass jar.